Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 on this Wednesday, the 11th of September. It is a little after 7 tonight. I apologise for that. We've had some technical gremlins crawling through the wires before we started tonight. I'm Douglas Mackenzie, bringing you stories from Scotland and around the world. I'm very pleased to be joined once again on the programme to discuss the stories behind the headlines by Maureen Watt. Now, usually I introduce Maureen with something about her experience as an MSP in the North East and her ministerial post within the Scottish Government, but Maureen's CV keeps expanding, so I will just note that Maureen was elected President of the SNP at the recent National Conference in Edinburgh. So congratulations, Maureen, once again, from me and from Broadcasting Scotland, and welcome to the programme, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Douglas. It's being part of the senior office bearers in the party is a lot more work than just being an ordinary member of the executive. So it's been up to here since I was elected.
I can imagine. I'm sure there are many people in the party, though, who will benefit from your experience.
Okay.
We start the programme tonight, as always, with the Ukraine update on this day 931 since the Russian invasion of the country. President Biden said today that his administration was working that out now when asked if the US would lift restrictions on Ukraine's use of long-range weapons against Russia. Newspaper reports in the UK said that Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, would discuss the issue with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky when he visits Ukraine today in the company of David Lammy, the UK Foreign Secretary. The UK and France build and supply Storm Shadow and Scalp EG cruise missiles to Ukraine, but it has become apparent that US technology is also involved, and Washington has held back from approving that technology's use for strikes inside Russian territory. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, said that Russia had received ballistic missiles from Iran and would likely use them in Ukraine within weeks. The White House National Security spokesman John Kirby said, "The supply of these Iranian missiles, which have a maximum range of about 75 miles, could allow Russia to use more of its arsenal for targets beyond the front line, while employing Iranian warheads for closer range targets." The UK said today it had started terminating all direct air services between the UK and Iran as part of sanctions imposed on Tehran for supplying Russia with missiles to use in Ukraine. London said it was acting alongside international partners to cancel its bilateral air service arrangements with Iran, which would restrict Iran Air's ability to fly into the UK. Germany and France also said they would apply new sanctions on Iran, including measures against Iran Air and the cancellation of bilateral air service agreements. The UK said it was joining the US in sanctioning individuals and organisations facilitating Iran's military support to Russia, including those involved in ballistic missile and drone supply chains. Russia said on Tuesday its forces had advanced by 1,000 square kilometres in eastern Ukraine in August and September. The Institute for the Study of War said Russian forces regained some positions on Monday as the Ukrainian occupation continued in Kursk Oblast. In Ukraine, Russian forces advanced on the Kupiansk-Svatov line near Seversk, near Pokrovsk, and southwest of Donetsk city, where Ukrainian forces regained positions near Seversk. Ukraine's Prosecutor General Andriy Kostin said on Tuesday that Kyiv suspected a senior Russian Air Force commander of ordering a missile strike on the Okhmadit Children's Hospital in central Kyiv in July that killed 2 people and caused extensive damage. Ukraine is in the final stages of talks with European partners to increase its power import capacity to 2.2 gigawatts from 1.7 gigawatts, the Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal said on today. Ukraine wants more than 150 countries to attend a second summit by the end of the year to look at ways of ending the war with Russia, Shmyhal said. Maureen, the last time you were on the programme, I asked you and said that there seemed to be a growing voices around the world asking for the Americans to give permission for longer range missiles to be used from Ukraine. And nearly all the commentators and indeed the UK press today trailed the visit of Secretary Blinken to Kyiv by saying it will be agreed today. But just before we came on air, David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, said discussions will continue with President Zelensky to tomorrow and possibly for a matter of weeks. What do you make of it? Why the delay?
Well, I really don't know. I would have thought that given we have definite proof now that Iran is helping Russia with its offensive in Ukraine, would be kind of touch paper for the United States and the UK to go to Ukraine, as they have done today, I understand, by train from Poland for security reasons, I suppose, they may have had better news for Zelensky, although it would seem that the US want more of an idea of what exactly Ukraine intends to do in terms of waging this war going forward, and wanting to know what exactly they need for what. I mean, obviously, we know there have been incursions by Ukraine into Russia, and there's no sign that that's going to let up. But it was also interesting that I noted, Douglas, that the UK pledged something like $780 million today for humanitarian and humanitarian aid and energy stabilization needs. So clearly, going into winter, it's really important that Ukraine has enough energy to see its citizens warm during the winter. So I think that was worth noting.
Yes, of course. But if the attacks continue, then so will the damage to electrical infrastructure in the country. I did notice a difference today that Secretary Blinken said the bottom line is that we want Ukraine to win, which was a step up from we will stand with Ukraine as long as it takes. And I suppose it's also possible if they're going to be allowed to use these missiles, that it's not something you're going to announce at a press conference. It may be something that's going on in the background.
Yes, and something else that I thought about, Douglas, is are the US making sure that they give as much aid as possible to Ukraine now, in case Trump were to win the election and Ukraine might be left high and dry for a while. So that might be in their minds too.
Yeah, we'll be coming to that later, clearly. So now to the latest from Israel and Gaza. At least 41,020 Palestinian people have been killed and 94,925 injured in Gaza since 7th of October, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. President Biden has described the Israel Defense Forces' fatal shooting of the Turkish-American protester Ayşenur Agi as totally unacceptable in his first extensive comments on her death. In a statement on Wednesday, Biden said that Israel had acknowledged responsibility for Agi's death, but stopped short of backing the demands put out by her family and other human rights advocates for an independent inquiry into the fatal shooting of the American activist at a protest in the West Bank town of Beta last week. Israeli airstrikes on Al-Mawazi, so-called humanitarian zone in the Gaza Strip, have killed at least 19 people and injured a further 60, according to witnesses and medical officials. Entire families disappeared in the Mawazi Khan Yunis massacre under the sand in deep holes, the Gaza Civil Defense spokesperson Mahmoud Basal said. The third phase of an ongoing campaign to vaccinate children in Gaza against polio continued today. From 10th of September to 13th of September, children in northern Gaza will receive vaccines, according to the UN. We speak about this obviously every time you're on the program, Maureen, and the news never seems to get any better, although the polio vaccination, which I think last time you were on was looking like it might not happen at all, has at least started. And something that we don't see much of in most of the UK media, and I've picked up from various places, the size of the demonstrations in Israel against Netanyahu. So are we seeing some changes?
Well, we keep saying that in hope, I think, rather than anything really concrete, because up till now, anyway, Netanyahu seems to have been just ignoring the groundswell of opinion against him um, in Israel. I think there may, though, be a change now because clearly the last hostages that came out of Israel were sadly dead bodies. And you wonder if, as time goes on, just how many of the hostages are one alive, are two uninjured, and able to come out, or will Hamas just keep murdering them? So I think the situation is very dire, and I really, because Netanyahu just seems to be on a mission of his own and his own very hardliners, it's difficult to see that whether anybody reason with that man anymore. And he's always said that he thought he needed till the end of this year to complete his task, and that looks increasingly likely.
Indeed, another thing very closely tied to the US elections. To Scotland now, and the Scottish Government was defeated in Holyrood today when the Scottish Greens and Labour voted for two Conservative Party Opposition Day debates calling for free school meals to all primary 6 and 7 pupils and a vote on reversing the return of peak rail fares. The votes are not binding on the Scottish Government, however they will be expected to make statements in Parliament in response to the defeats. While uncertainty about the total amount of money the Scottish Government will receive for the current year in Barnett consequentials, the Scottish Government will continue to be wary of authorising any additional spending. Well, in reporting that story, I think back to 2020 and the vote in Westminster where the activities of Marcus Rashford caused a debate asking for free meals to be extended into the holiday period, which had already been approved in Scotland. All the Scottish MPs, except 6, voted in favour of extending this. The 6 who didn't vote for it were 5 Scottish Conservatives who voted against it and Douglas Ross who abstained. So isn't it a bit rich that the Conservatives bring a motion on this today?
Absolutely. I mean, I am sure that most Scots see the hypocrisy of the Tories asking for more spending on things like free school meals. They oppose big state, oppose anything that will help the poor. And, this is just politics of the gutter, really. But is something that we can expect from the Tories in Holyrood under Douglas Ross. Now, whether there will be a change when they get a new leader will be interesting to see. But I think that increasingly Scots are getting fed up of opposition parties who know they're in a party of minorities undermining the work of the party that was given the biggest number of votes and asked to form a government. It's time that some of them realise that their job here is to work in that parliament in the interest of all Scots. And the opposition parties are not doing that. I'm not sure how the Liberal Democrats voted today, but it sounds like there may be some discussion with the Liberal Democrats. And I think that any party that was to show some maturity and put the people of Scotland first rather than petty politics, might begin to get some trust from the people of Scotland. But at the moment, the result of this behaviour is plague on all your houses.
There's the moral side of this, and there's also the political side of it. So I'm interested in your view. I mean, you must have advised and been advised on so many motions over the years in the Scottish Parliament. But here are the Tories saying, spend more money after 14 years of austerity, and Labour backing it with however many years of austerity they're going to impose. It just seems like a very risky political strategy for them to undertake.
Yeah, but it was their day of for opposition debate. I mean, it has been like this in the Scottish Parliament for years now. I remember it, and you were just so it was just so tedious that you had to sit through these debates on a Wednesday afternoon when there was lots else you could be getting on with. And I'm not decrying, the subjects which are being discussed, but the way that they present them, as you say, Douglas, where they're asking for more money to be spent, is really awful. And, Labour are down south are having to ditch lots of their manifesto commitments because they've found this black hole. Yet in Scotland, we're supposed to find money under the sofa all the time to pay for these extra things. And it's just, I mean, I'm sure the public must see through this and are just, as I say, really fed up. And the problem is that it's fed up with all of you rather than seeing that the Scottish Government is trying to do its best with a very limited budget, an increasingly limited budget, because consequentials are not coming through from the Westminster government, and that's what's happened with the old age pensioners. And because the money isn't there, and because of inflation, COVID, Liz Truss's disastrous handling of the economy, everything is costing more. Everybody knows that. Do they think that the people don't know that the Scottish Government is subject to the same inflation as everybody else? And yet we're supposed to find more money. I hope that more and more people are realising how stupid the opposition parties are.
Thank you. Staying with the Scottish Government, and today they published the Green Industrial Strategy. A focused strategy has been launched to place Scotland at the forefront of the net zero economy, with targeted actions to secure growth and investment. Delivered as part of the programme for government, the Green Industrial Strategy sets out 5 priority areas where efforts and resources will be concentrated. These are maximising Scotland's wind economy, growing the hydrogen sector, developing the carbon capture, utilisation and storage sector, supporting green economy, professional and financial services, attracting clean energy intensive industries such as data centres. A range of specific actions, including hosting a global offshore wind investment forum next spring, working with the sector to develop hubs of hydrogen production and demand, and working with public and private partners to drive investment in key projects. Deputy First Minister Kate Forbes and Acting Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero and Energy, Julian Martin, unveiled the strategy during a visit to Flowcopter, a company developing drones that can be used in the offshore wind sector. Ms. Forbes said the global transition to net zero provides opportunities across every part of our economy through a strengthened partnership between the public and private sectors. This green industrial strategy spells out where we believe the greatest opportunities lie and where we will focus our attention and resources. It provides certainty for businesses both at home and abroad by demonstrating where and how we will work to reduce barriers to investment and where appropriate, share risk and reward. So Maureen, this is real concrete stuff that's happening, rather more so than the rather airy-fairy GB Energy coming from Westminster, and John Swinney himself was up in the northeast in Buckie on Monday. So things are really happening with this. It's not just going to say hot air, but for wind power, but it's something which is affecting people on a daily basis.
Yes, and it's not highlighted enough, which is why I'm glad we're talking about it tonight, because the potential for renewable energy in Scotland is huge. And if you speak to organisations like Scottish Renewables, it's absolutely massive. I mean, first of all, they talked about you talked about the wind, where there's still huge potential, but we're already generating 100% of our electricity and some more to export. Hydrogen is massive, and the interest in our hydrogen economy from countries in Europe is huge. I know Germany are interested in us exporting our hydrogen economy. So, what's interesting is, although we often get criticised that with green energy the jobs aren't coming, you talked about green energy jobs in terms of financial jobs in the green economy. I think that's really important, and also having data centres in Scotland, where lots of energy is produced by these data centres, often evaporated in the air and not captured. I mean, I remember years ago a company in one of the industrial estates in my constituency talking about the amount of hot water that they just discharged into the burns and into the sea daily, which could have been rerouted and used in the district heating scheme. I think that will happen now. I don't take my word for it, but there's lots of areas where this can happen, and data centers are ones that produce a huge amount of energy that can be used in such things like these district heating schemes, so that we actually see people getting lower energy bills.
Yeah, and of course, with data centers, if we had localized energy pricing, or an independent Scotland controlling its own energy, there would be such an incentive to move data centers to Scotland because of the cheap energy. And as you say, there are a lot of employment opportunities around data centers.
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
the UK economy now, and the anticipated post-election bounce-back in the UK economy failed to materialise, as activity flatlined in July for a second month, according to the latest official data. The Office for National Statistics, ONS, said the pre-election stalling of activity in June was followed by another month in which gross domestic product remained unchanged. Although the economy grew by 0.5%, in the 3 months to July, the weak performance of the economy during Labour's first weeks in power came as a shock to the city, which had been expecting growth of 0.2% on the month. The economy grew by 0.7% in the first 3 months of 2024, followed by a 0.6% expansion in the second quarter, but the latest ONS figures suggest the recovery from the mild recession in late 2023 has petered out. Second month of zero growth slightly pushed up market expectations. The Bank of England would cut interest rates for a second time in a row when policymakers meet on 19th of September. Official borrowing costs currently stand at 5%. The thing which surprised me about this report, Maureen, was the word surprising. That economists were surprised. Reuters had done a survey and they predicted 0.2% growth. Yet, it's only a few months since Goldman Sachs produced their report, which said that Brexit had knocked 5% off Britain's GDP. And also, we've had the dire warnings from the Chancellor of tax rises, spending cuts, and so on, which is bound to dampen consumer confidence, and consumer spending is the first factor in measuring GDP. So is it a surprise to you?
No, because it's more of the same, isn't it? Although, it's kind of a bit if you say, well, this is Labour not being able to influence the economy. But I mean, they will have to be seen to be influencing the growth rate pretty quickly, in my view, because more people are getting very agitated about living in supposedly the fifth or sixth richest country in the world, and yet not seeing any of the riches coming to them. And I think that's a real problem for any government at the UK level. And I was thinking when I heard this today that the economy has flatlined and is not growing in England, that just how long do people give them, and at what stage does the UK government realise that following the policies of the previous governments in terms of trying to get economic growth aren't working? So there is a real dilemma about growing the economy, and as you say, tax increases and cuts, which will damage the economy, make people more unlikely to spend and grow the economy. So I don't quite see what their economic strategy is, to be honest, and what alternatives they're going to come up with if the economy continues to flatline, because you can't keep cutting and cutting unless you want to be a country that has a very little state intervention in people's lives, which I don't think is what the UK, what the people of the UK, they want more state help, but not the equivalent increase in taxes. So, governments just don't debate these things anymore, and the mainstream media certainly isn't prepared to engage in a debate on these issues.
No, and that leads very nicely into the next piece. October's budget will require difficult decisions on tax, spending and welfare, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves has warned. Her comments came as the Housing and Planning Minister Matthew Pennycook said plans to scale back winter fuel payments for pensioners in England and Wales would not be watered down after dozens of Labour MPs abstained on the key Commons vote on Tuesday night. Reeves also defended cutting winter fuel payments for all but the poorest pensioners as the right decision as she spoke to broadcasters on a day when new figures showed the UK economy flatlined in July for the second month in a row. Reeves said she had not wanted to strip winter fuel payments from millions of pensioners, but was forced to by the black hole in the public finances. About a dozen Labour MPs are thought to have deliberately abstained, and just one, John Trickett, voted against the Labour whip. The veteran MP was joined by 5 of the 7 Labour MPs who were suspended after voting to scrap the 2-child benefit cap: Ian Byrne, Afsana Begum, Zara Sultana, Richard Bergen and John MacDonald. All of the Scottish Labour MPs, except 2 who abstained, voted with the UK government to means test the winter fuel payments for pensioners. Again, I was struck by one word in the statement from the Chancellor, and that was difficult. These are not difficult decisions, are they, if you go for the poorest in society? Difficult is if you're going to tackle corporate greed and the wealthiest people who have the broadest shoulders.
Absolutely. And I saw a report, I know what it was, when the COVID inquiry was restarting, there was talk about the billions that had been wasted by giving contracts for PPE and other things to Tory members and Tory donors. And it was I mean, it was literally billions and billions. Now, the Labour Party are talking about trying to retrieve some of that. I think maybe even the Tories start a kind of half-hearted effort to look into that. But that was billions and billions of pounds wasted with on PPE and other things. PPE, which has now had to be burned, is just, I mean, it's like some third world country, the way that the Tories have behaved when they were in government, giving huge sums to their pals. And what I can't get my head around is why, for example, spending on COVID is not there anymore. So why isn't there more money to free up for the things that we really need, like spending money on pension and their fuel payments? I mean, I think I've said on this program before that introducing it in July for the same November or December is cruel beyond words. And winter fuel payments came in to a large extent because of the work that the late Margaret Ewing did when she was an MP in Westminster, and she worked on it for years and years. It was eventually introduced. So, knowing, of course, that Scottish pensioners are colder than those in the rest of England. And I saw Andrew Bowie on the telly today trying to defend, trying to say that the winter fuel payments should be kept. I'm sure in the same position they would probably scrap them, but his constituency covers Braemar, which is often the coldest place in the whole of the UK.
Yes, of course. I mean, you said that springing it for winter in July is extremely unfair. I mean, the other thing is that it was announced just before the policy would have been devolved to Scotland, and Shirley Ann Somerville was saying today that the policy was devolved and the funding is not, and Jenny Gilruth was even more direct in the effect of Westminster on spending in Scotland by saying to the unionists, it's their union, they should own it.
Yeah, well said.
But yeah, I mean, it did seem particularly cynical to announce this cut just before it became a devolved policy. And I understand that Labour MPs are now writing to their constituents to say this is the fault of the SNP that you're not getting the winter fuel payment.
Yeah, did I read somewhere too that the Scottish Government weren't even consulted about it? I mean, there wasn't. I think was it in Parliament today that Rishi Sunak actually asked for the impact assessment on which the Labour government had made their decision on this, and of course, Stammer dodged the question. But it would be interesting to see what the impact statement said, and whether, as we suspect, there are going to be more deaths, more people in hospital because of cold-related illnesses, and you do wonder whether it is going to save any money in the long run. And you do get the impression that these kind of things are not worked out very well at Westminster. I mean, these are the kind of things that ministers, when I was in government, always question civil servants on, and go away and come back with proper figures before we actually make a decision on that. And you don't get the impression that that's happening currently under the new Labour government.
Indeed not. Staying with spending in Scotland, and the UK government has rejected a request by the Scottish government to underwrite the cost of financial risk in holding the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow in 2026. It has offered to provide a contribution of up to £2.3 million, short of what is needed to secure the viability of the event. Scottish Government Minister Neil Gray said that he would leave no stone unturned to fund the Games, but said that he was concerned that there was both a reputational risk and a financial risk to hosting the Games without the necessary backing. Mr. Gray warned that time was of the essence in order to be able to make a decision on whether to proceed with a bid to host the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow. Glasgow hosted the Games in 2014, however the 2026 Games would be a much more scaled down event, which could feature between 10 to 13 sports instead of the 18 that took place in 2014. The Games were originally planned to be held in Victoria in Australia, but the city pulled out in 2023 due to financial issues. I was reading this morning, Maureen, that where was the comment? Yeah, just about everyone I speak to in politics about this thinks it's a bad idea. It would be an experience, a nostalgic wave for the 2014 Games, which will clearly fall short of them. And I think back to Edinburgh and its great Commonwealth Games when I was a school kid in 1970, and then the Damp Squid in 1986 when it was repeated. So everyone in politics thinks it's a bad idea. How about you?
Well, I'm torn about this because, leaving the debate about whether we should have a Commonwealth or not, there was only, I noticed, one athlete from Malawi. I can't remember whether, I think it was even at the main Olympics or the Paralympics. And I just thought if this was the Commonwealth Games, there would be a whole lot more. Now, there must be other countries of the Commonwealth that just simply can't afford to send people to the Olympic Games, but could send them to the Commonwealth Games. So in that respect, I think it gives a platform for countries, smaller, poorer countries, to let their athletes compete at a global level. However, I think Glasgow and the Scottish Government are between a rock and a hard place. The Commonwealth Games Committee have pledged however many millions to fund it, and now the UK government has come in with some more money. But, still that could leave the Glasgow and the Scottish Government a big hole. I wonder if there's a role for the different sporting organisations to come in here, and if it's been slimmed down, could they sort of tag on paying for their sport themselves to come in on it? For example, cycling or rowing or something like that. So I think there's a lot more discussion, but as you say, Douglas, time is running.
Yeah, thank you. And I must apologise. I remembered the quote from this morning and forgot who said it, and it was Stuart MacDonald, former MP in Glasgow. The UK government has ordered an independent public inquiry into the 1989 murder of the Belfast solicitor Pat Finucane, one of the most controversial killings of the Troubles. The Northern Ireland Secretary Hilary Benn made the announcement on Wednesday after decades of campaigning by Finucane's family and supporters, who say the full extent of state complicity in this crime was covered up. Loyalist gunmen burst into the lawyer's home on 12th of February 1989 and shot him 14 times in front of his wife and children. It later emerged that Brian Nelson, a paramilitary intelligence officer responsible for directing Ulster Defence Association (UDA) attacks, was an agent controlled by the Force Research Unit of the British Army. The murder ignited a political furore and led to the gradual exposure of the links between the security forces and loyalist paramilitaries, including the activities of Nelson. Hilary Benn said today that the Labour government took its human rights obligations seriously. It's very hard for any of us to understand fully the trauma of those who lost loved ones, sons and daughters, spouses and partners, fathers and mothers, and what they have been through, he told the House of Commons. Nothing would bring back the dead or erase the pain, Ben continued, but what we can do is to seek transparency to help provide answers to families and to work together for a better future for Northern Ireland, which has made so much progress since these terrible events. I hope that this inquiry will finally provide the information that the Finucane family has sought for so long. In 2004, a judicial review of investigations into the murder recommended a public inquiry, which the then government accepted, but it never happened, said Ben. In 2012, the then Prime Minister David Cameron admitted shocking levels of collusion and apologised to the Finucane family, but resisted a public inquiry. The Dublin government welcomed the decision, and Michelle O'Neill, the Sinn Féin deputy leader and First Minister of Northern Ireland, said it was a momentous and long overdue decision. Pat Finucane's son John is the Sinn Féin MP for North Belfast and witnessed the killing as a child. I remember the shocking event, but it's possibly even more shocking, Maureen, that's taken since 1989 for anything to be done about it. And the Labour Party were in power before that. They could have acted before now. What is the reason for the delay? And is a public inquiry the right thing to do? That may well take another 7 years.
Yes, it was a surprising announcement today. I don't think it had been trailed by anybody. And like you say, Douglas, it's a bit puzzling to understand why the Labour Party, the Labour government, so soon in office, has decided to hold this public inquiry. I mean, it was a dreadful, dreadful murder. A man, Pat Finucane, shot in the head several times in front of his wife and children while they were having dinner. I mean, it was absolutely awful, and that whole family have had to live with that all this time. So I can see why they've consistently called for a public inquiry, and it'll be interesting to see whether more comes out about the collusion between the British state and unionist paramilitaries in Northern Ireland. But whether it will have the outcome that it wants, I doubt, and whether things will come out which may upset the delicate calendar in Northern Ireland now is extremely, shall I just say, a kind of neutral word.
Okay, across the Atlantic now, and Kamala Harris and Donald Trump sparred on Tuesday evening in a primetime TV presidential debate that repeatedly went off the rails as the former president pursued bizarre and often falsehood-ridden tangents about crowd sizes, immigration policy, and abortion access. The Philadelphia debate marked arguably the most significant opportunity for both Harris and Trump since Joe Biden withdrew from the presidential race in July. Harris began by crossing over to Trump's podium to shake his hand and introduce herself, acknowledging that the two presidential nominees had never met face-to-face before, which made Trump look a bit uncomfortable. Trump began with attack lines about the high inflation seen earlier in Biden's presidency, then pivoted to mocking Harris as a Marxist and peddling baseless claims that Democrats want to execute the baby by allowing abortions after the birth of a baby. That false claim was corrected by both Harris and the ABC News anchor Lindsay Davis, who joined her fellow moderator David Muir in fact-checking some of Trump's statements throughout the evening. Harris responded with a stinging rebuke of Trump's record on abortion, criticising him for nominating 3 of the Supreme Court justices who ruled to overturn Roe v. Wade in 2022. One does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree the government and Donald Trump certainly should not be telling a woman what to do with her body, Harris said. Trump then chose to spread debunked claims that Haitian migrants in an Ohio city have started capturing and eating their neighbors' pets. They're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats, Trump said. They're eating the pets of the people that live there, and this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame. The outburst instantly became a source of mockery on social media, and ABC's fact-checking immediately refuted Trump's claim as false. While some moments of the debate bordered on absurdity, other exchanges regarding foreign policy and the January 6th insurrection were more significant in their responses. Pressed on his false claims regarding widespread fraud in the 2020 presidential election, Trump again refused to acknowledge his defeat, prompting a stark warning from Harris. On foreign policy, Harris fielded difficult questions on the war in Gaza as she expressed her support for Israel's right to defend itself while calling for security, self-determination, and the dignity they so rightly deserve for Palestinians. Asked about his own stance on the war, Trump reiterated his bombastic claims that his presence in the White House would have prevented the wars in both Gaza and Ukraine. When asked directly whether he wanted Ukraine to win this war against Russia, Trump deflected. Kamala Harris said he would do whatever would please Putin. The debate ended with Trump attacking Harris as the worst vice president in the history of our country, while Harris vowed to be a president for all Americans. I don't know if you stayed up to watch it, Maureen. I did. It was entertaining, amongst many other things. Or even following it today, what did you make of it? And will it have an effect? Because it seems no matter what Trump does, his core base love him.
Yes, his core base love him, as you say, but even the core base is beginning to get smaller, I think, as people are leaving his rallies, we hear, because he just witters on and on about nothing very much. And as you say, about things that aren't true. I have managed to see some clips of it. And I thought it was telling that Harris went over to shake his hand, and he clearly didn't want to do that. I think we know that Trump's got a bit of a phobia about handshakes, hasn't he? So maybe that put him off his start a bit. But clearly, from the clips that I have seen, Kamala Harris did win the debate. I haven't seen the results of any polling after the debate, but I thought it was interesting that Trump immediately went to the what's the room called? Not the green room, but the room where the room where the spin room. Yes, thank you. The spin room, where all the pundits are sitting, deciding on what they thought. I thought maybe that was clearly somebody who realised that he hadn't done well and wanted to kind of change the narrative of those in the spin room. But it's still really tight. It's still down to, as we know, very few states, and there's still all to play for. And is it 60 days or something until the election? It's going to be a long time for both candidates and for all of us who are interested in seeing how it pans out.
Yeah, interestingly, you picked up on the handshake there and Trump's phobia. I'm sure a good dose of bleach will see him right if he has any worries on that score.
Taken internally, like for COVID?
Far be it from me to suggest it. Back to Scotland, and First Minister John Swinney has called for the immediate release of Jagtar Singh Johal after a meeting with his family. Jagtar Singh Johal, who is from Dumbarton, has been imprisoned in India for almost 70 years after being arrested while visiting India for a wedding. His family say that his ongoing imprisonment is extremely difficult and distressing, and have called for the Indian authorities to release Mr. Johal. The First Minister said, "I am gravely concerned at the continued detention of Jagtar Singh Johal and allegations of his mistreatment and torture in custody. Jagtar should be released immediately in line with the recommendations of the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. Although this issue is reserved, I and the Scottish Government will continue lobbying the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and UK Government to use every lever at their disposal to call for Jagtar's release and raise the case with Indian authorities on Mr. Johal's behalf." The Scottish Government has been very active throughout this period of detention in trying to get him released. So this is just carrying on from what has been done before. But has the UK government dragged its feet on it? Or is it just without influence?
So I can't understand why this is going on so long. Is it? I mean, I just don't understand why it's going on so long because, I mean, it's not as if he's committed some political crime or anything, as far as I can see. And as you say, it's gone along. It's gone over three um, first ministers and probably as many prime ministers. And certainly, prime ministers have said in the past that they have raised it when they have met Modi. So I honestly can't remember the background to this so much. I mean, surely it's not something about prisoner exchange or anything, is it? I really don't know. So I really don't feel that I can comment um, very much on this. All right, I'm
Okay.
hearing in my ear that he's a Sikh nationalist, so maybe that has something to do with it. But yeah, I wouldn't have thought so. But anyway,
Hmm.
never mind.
Well, so let's hope it's resolved before too long.
Okay, I'm hearing that he's a Sikh nationalist, but surely if you wanted to get rid of him, if you wanted to stop him being of any threat to the state of India, you would just deport him, surely. But never
Yeah,
mind.
you
We
would have
will.
thought so.
I mean, we've got the thing is that we've got to keep up the pressure, both in the from Scotland because he's a Scottish citizen, and the UK, and hopefully all the Labour MPs from Scotland will be fighting on his behalf too to have him released.
Yeah, let's hope so. Final story. Scotland's ambition to become a leading space nation has taken a step forward. Space sector entrepreneur Daniel Smith has taken up the newest position in the Scottish Government's International Business Network. Daniel Smith is a serial space entrepreneur who has played a founding role in 5 space companies since 2017, including the global space communications firm Astra Agency, which supports 70 private and public space organizations, a spaceport design company enabling spaceflight from emerging space nations, and a European launch vehicle firm based in Scotland. Mr. Smith's role is unpaid. His appointment is for a tenure of 2 years until 31st of December 2026, with the possibility of extension for a further 2 years. His remit is to help identify new space business and investment opportunities in Scotland. Announcing the appointment at Spacecom Expo in Glasgow, the first to be held in Scotland, Business Minister Richard Lochhead said, "The creation of the Space Envoy role is another indication of how quickly the sector is growing and of how importantly the Scottish Government regards its contributions to the economy." The Scottish Government has an ambition to capture £4 billion worth of the global space market, and Daniel Smith's entrepreneurial background will help Scottish businesses forge strategic partnerships and identify new opportunities. We are well on our way to becoming a European leader in the sector. The latest available data shows that the number of space-related companies based in Scotland rose by 25% in the space of a year, with the sector's total income increasing by 65% over the same period, demonstrating the phenomenal scale of opportunity before us. Um, Clearly a growth area for Scotland, although the story can never live up to the headline, which said Scottish Government appoints Space Envoy, and I was hoping for some kind of Caledonian Buzz Lightyear. But seriously, it is an area in which Scotland seems to excel in engineering.
Yes, absolutely. I was having a quick look on my phone through to Scottish news from Scotland on the BBC to see if they had anything on it, and they don't in their main headlines anyway, which is a bit of a shame because, as you said, Douglas, Scotland is now one of the European leaders in space projects. And also, I'd like to say it's great to see Richard Lochhead back at his desk, given he was so near death early on this year. But yes, we have seen space sites in Shetland, I think it is, and also in the Northwest Highlands. And as you said, Douglas, lots of space-related jobs in Glasgow. Clearly a growth area and a good news story to finish off with on Broadcasting Scotland tonight.
Thank you, Maureen. My usual reminder this evening that at Broadcasting Scotland we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Right now, we urgently need to increase our donations if we are to be able to pay our bills. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but our income is just over £2,000 a month, and we're now facing mounting debts. Please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you once again to my guest tonight, Maureen Watt, always a pleasure. And thank you at home for watching. Goodbye and good night.